Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Gyo Kim. It's been more than 10 days since a South Korean civilian was shot dead by North Korean troops. So far, South and North Korea have not taken any visible steps to launch an investigation into the incident. And after sending a formal notice to Seoul, Pyongyang has not mentioned about the fatal shooting amid growing criticism from the international community over how it handled the South Korean individual who drifted into the North Korean territorial sea. We'll discuss these and more. Joining us today is Jean Lee, Director of the Korea Program at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Ms. Lee was the first Pyongyang Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. David Maxwell also joins us today. He is a Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Mr. Maxwell was a planner for the United Nations Command and the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command. Thank you so much for joining us today. Pyongyang has not taken any follow-up action after sending a formal notice in which it explained about the North Korean troops' killing of a South Korean civilian. Instead, North Korea warned of tensions, accusing South Korean operations that searched the body near the North Korean waters. This isn't the response we expect from North Korea, or is it? Why are they acting like this? Ms. Lee, can we start with you?
I'm not so sure that we should be surprised by this. And it's quite possible that there have been some discussions internally. There was a party meeting that Kim Jong-un presided over just a few days ago, largely focused on what they call anti-epidemic work, and perhaps this was discussed as part of their anti-epidemic work. Internationally, though, and also I would say domestically, they're very focused right now on preparations for their upcoming Workers' Party anniversary on October 10th. So it's hard for me to imagine that we'll hear anything concrete until perhaps after that occasion. And then I think it's still very early on in how this incident is unfolding in terms of the diplomacy issue or the political issue between the two Koreas.
Mr. Maxwell, your thought as well?
Yes, I agree with Jean. I think we shouldn't be surprised by North Korean action. While I don't think that Kim Jong-un ordered this specific murder, but I do think that the rules and the procedures that they have in place to defend against COVID and really to defend against any kind of infiltration into the North, is par for the course. I mean, it's really in keeping with what North Korea is doing. We've read reports that they've issued shoot-to-kill orders on the border with China. So it is, to me, completely in accordance with the nature of the regime and how it acts to commit this kind of murder. Their reaction, I think, is par for the course. I don't think that they will agree to any kind of joint investigation. North Korea does not act as a responsible member of the international community, and they're demonstrating that in this incident.
Is there any way Seoul can get the proper level of cooperation or even any kind of cooperation?
Well, I don't think so. And although this incident probably wasn't planned, I think they are planning on how to exploit it. And somehow they are going to try to extract concessions from South Korea because they really believe that President Moon is so focused on engagement and peace that he is willing to make concessions in order to pursue that. When really, in reality, North Korea has no intention to even meet South Korea halfway.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Lee, your thought?
If handled carefully, this could perhaps provide an opening, but we have to remember that it means that there was a sacrifice of a life, a person, a South Korean citizen who was not rescued, who was sacrificed in perhaps for a larger cause. And so we shouldn't forget that while the larger picture of perhaps using this as an opportunity for diplomacy is promising, failing to push back and failing to defend a citizen or protect your people has larger ramifications as well.
South Korean military began mobilizing its vessels and aircrafts in search of the body of the South Korean civilian. However, there are criticisms over how the military had initially responded to the incident. Some say the military could have prevented the whole incident from taking place, as it knew all along a South Korean man was floating into the North Korean territory. Mr. Maxwell, was the military response adequate?
Well, it's difficult to say. We just don't know the detail. So it's difficult to really analyze the situation without knowing the exact timeline. But I will say, in the South Korean Navy's defense, that it's very hard to find a person afloat at sea, and so it depends on when they learned of this. Did they have ships in the area? Were they able to react to this in time? So I think that it was very difficult to conduct a military operation to rescue this person in these circumstances. What is more troubling, I think, is the fact that there was a known incident, and what was the reporting all the way back to the Blue House, and then the timing with President Moon's speech at the UN General Assembly. I think that's really more troubling than the military reaction, although, again, we need to know more details about what the military, in fact, what actions it did, in fact, take.
Mr. Maxwell, let me ask you one more question. South Korean military is believed to have garnered the knowledge of this incident by intercepting North Korea's radio communications. How reliable is this as a means of gaining information? Is there anything that the South Korean military could have done in response to this to save the South Korean men from being killed?
Well, signals intelligence is very important, and countries invest a lot of resources into developing signals intelligence and to be able to intercept the adversary's radio and telephone communications. However, it is not magic, and it takes analysis and interpretation, especially if the adversary is speaking cryptically, using code words, and the like.
Ms. Lee, I want to hear your insight as well. As a journalist, you've been covering the Korean Peninsula for long. How do you assess the method that South Korea gains its information from North Korea?
I would hope, and if we're referring to intelligence, I would hope that the United States and South Korea have robust intelligence methods. I'm perfectly fine not knowing the details because I think that for security reasons that has to be quiet. But I think what this does is, aside from intelligence, what this does is remind us again that when we don't have good communications with the North Koreans, when those communication channels are cut, it makes it very difficult to respond or exchange information the way two normal countries would when there's a citizen in their waters. And so it means that North Korea is able to control the narrative, shape the narrative of any information coming out of North Korea. With this particular incident, I think it's still very early on in the investigation. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we're not going to know.
This incident shed light on how the North Korean regime deals with human rights. Ms. Lee, you have years of experience actually living inside North Korea. And we have heard a lot about North Korea's suppression of human rights, but is there really no way for North Korean people to voice their grievances when their rights are violated?
Is not normal for us. The execution-style shooting of a tourist who's just gone for a walk in the middle of the night. And I think this reminded me of that incident and just of the difference between North Korea and the rest of the world in terms of what kind of behavior is acceptable. So I think it reveals to us how harsh life is, and that these types of summary executions or killings might be and are probably very much a part of daily life in North Koreans.
One thing that has always struck me in talking to escapees from the North is their lack of understanding of human rights as we know it, because many people in the North have no conception of human rights. What is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and what are they entitled to as human beings, and the dignity of human beings? That doesn't exist inside North Korea. And so while we as outsiders who live in the free world, just can't imagine why they don't resist and why they don't stand up for their rights. When you don't know what your rights are, it's very difficult to stand up for those. And so I think that we have to understand the difference between Koreans in the North and Koreans in the South.
UN Special Rapporteur Thomas Ohea Quintana told VOA that he doesn't consider North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's expression of regrets as an apology. He said it is because Kim declared that the North Korean guards didn't infringe instructions and regulations when shooting the South Korean man. What is your take on this, Mr. Maxwell?
I agree with the Special Rapporteur. I think that this was a non-apology apology. I think that, we've even heard reports that the crew of the NKPA that conducted this murder was actually praised and rewarded with time off. So I think that this was a non-apology apology. And I think that in addition, the subsequent threats against the South, warning against sending ships to look for the body, is really typical North Korean actions where they're going to raise tensions based on this incident. And really, it served as a rebuke of President Moon. And I think that, although it is interpreted as apology by many, it was a rebuke of President Moon and his desire for engagement. And so I think we really have to keep that in mind.
Ms. Lee, what about you? Did you take it as an apology, what Kim Jong-un said?
So one thing that's reassuring, it is reassuring in a sense to know that there's some communications that the president and the leader of North Korea have a way to communicate. However, I don't think we should be, I think it was a really savvy move by Kim Jong-un, but I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that despite Kim Jong-un's apology for what he called an unsavory situation or unsavory incident, that there was a brutal shooting and killing of a South Korean official at the maritime. So I think because North Korea and the leader, they keep themselves so reserved and so hard to access and to reach, that when they do reach out, people tend to get a little bit, what is the word, overwhelmed by that. And it tends to cloud our judgment when it comes to what's actually happening. So I just want to make sure that we remember the brutality of this incident and not be kind of wooed by this overture by Kim Jong-un. Because he's, again, as you point out, he's apologizing for possible friction. He's not apologizing for the act itself.
Mm-hmm. In order to hold North Korea accountable, some international law experts say the family of the South Korean victim can file a complaint to the United Nations. They say it could put North Korea under more pressure from the international community. Do you think this will work, Ms. Lee?
I think we can look at the past pattern, including numerous UN Security Council resolutions banning North Korea from developing its ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program, and their complete defiance of that as your answer to whether they would respond or behave differently based on any pressure from an international organization. That they don't follow international norms or international rules, and they stick to their own schedule, to their own rules. And this is a reminder of that no matter how many inter-Korean deals we have or armistice agreements or UN Security Council resolutions, that they're still on their own time scale according to their own set of values.
I think in South Korea, I think that the family should, file a suit against North Korea. And from what I understand, there are actually royalties for North Korean broadcasts that are collected when South Korean news media broadcasts from North Korea. And so there are actually funds that are collected as royalties. Maybe those could be attached and provided as compensation to the family. But I think that South Korea really needs to pressure North Korea, through legal means, diplomatic means. They need to pay the price. And I think that kind of pressure is very important.
Well, as you two mentioned, at the end of the day, South Korea is the country that is directly concerned. How did South Korea do in terms of addressing the issue so far? And what is the next step South Korea should take? Mr. Maxwell?
I think South Korea's position is really clouded by the Moon administration's vision for engagement. And I think they put that as a priority. And I think that puts them in a weak position in regards to North Korea, because North Korea thinks that they can act. So I think that South Korea really needs to reevaluate its policies and really its assumptions about Kim Jong-un. And the assumption is that he does want peace. He does want an end of war declaration. He does want engagement. And I think that these actions illustrate that he does not want the same things as South Korea. And therefore, the Moon administration should really adjust its policies and strategy to take into account that the assumptions that President Moon has made for the past almost 4 years are erroneous.
the fact that there wasn't a stronger response from the South Koreans will have a kind of lasting effect and repercussion as well, and feed into exactly what David Maxwell is talking about. The North Koreans are always pushing to the boundaries to see how far they can go with South Korea, and there has to be some pushback on the South Korean side as well. Even if what you want is peace on the Korean Peninsula, because they need to know what the boundaries are, and in this case, defending the life of a South Korean citizen should be very important.
Meanwhile, the United States seems to be very prudent on this issue. Deputy Secretary Biegun said it was a tragic incident that was deeply disturbing to the Korean people and certainly to the United States. But he didn't go further than that. Why do you think that is the case, Ms. Lee?
It's difficult to talk about these things because we have heard that the Secretary of State is heading to the region. And so clearly this is something that they're going to discuss. And in a sense, I want to sit back and wait to see how things unfold. And it's a delicate dance. I think the United States has to recognize as well that this is an inter-Korean issue. Also, it is taking place in those very sensitive, disputed waters along the NLL. So it could involve some discussion with the UN command. It's just very complicated. And so I think there's a diplomatic dance between the United States and South Korea as well in US involvement in this issue.
And I think what this also really illustrates is that the alliance and the strength of the alliance is more important than negotiations with the North. I mean, we certainly want denuclearization. We certainly want peace on the peninsula. But North Korea's recalcitrance is what's preventing all of that. And so the strength of the alliance and preserving the alliance is most important. And so I think that's why the United States makes a statement that it does. But it is really consulting because protecting the strength of the alliance must be paramount to ensure security on the Korean Peninsula.
All right. Well, no progress is in sight between South and North Korea, the two countries directly involved in this unfortunate incident. And there's a growing possibility that the matter might be brought to the international stage. What we know for sure is that a reliable member of the international community will not refuse to accept its responsibility for its actions. Ms. Lee and Mr. Maxwell, thank you both very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.